Hello, my handsome boy, I am Jessica. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in the late evening when conversations slow down and people begin to observe more than they speak. He sat alone at the corner table, a cup of tea resting gently in his hand. His hair had turned silver long ago. His face carried the map of a life fully lived, lines not of weakness but of stories. And yet across the room she kept looking at him. She was no more than 35, vibrant, alive, the kind of presence that naturally draws attention. People noticed her the moment she walked in, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at him. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Maybe she was just scanning the room. Maybe her gaze passed by him unintentionally. But then it happened again and again. Her eyes didn't just land on him, they stayed. Now, if you are a man over 60, you might be thinking, why would a young woman look at me like that? Is it real or am I imagining it? Do I still have that kind of presence? And here's the truth. Most men never hear at your age, attraction doesn't disappear. It transforms, and sometimes it becomes even more powerful. Let me explain something. Most people misunderstand about female psychology, attraction for women. Especially those who are emotionally aware is not just about youth muscles or surface-level charm. It is about something deeper, something quieter, something far more rare. It is about emotional gravity. You see, younger men often try to impress. They speak louder, move faster, try harder. But what happens when a man stops trying? What happens when a man becomes comfortable in his own silence? That is where something shifts, because a woman doesn't just notice what you show. She feels what you carry, and that man sitting quietly in the corner. He wasn't trying to attract anyone, but he carried something many younger men don't. He carried presence, not loud, not forced, just real. Now let me tell you what was happening in her mind when she looked at him. She wasn't just seeing his age, she was sensing his stability. She was sensing a life that had already been tested and survived. Younger men often bring excitement, but older men, when grounded, bring something far more rare, emotional safety. And here is something most men over 60 don't realize. Women don't always seek what is exciting. Sometimes they seek what feels safe, steady, and deeply human, because by 35, a woman has already experienced enough illusions to recognize truth when she sees it, and truth often looks like a man who is no longer pretending. Now back to that moment, she finally stood up, walked slowly, calmly toward his table, and he felt it, that quiet shift in the air. She stopped beside him and said softly, "Can I sit here?" He looked up, slightly surprised but not shaken. He nodded, no rush, no performance, just calm acceptance. And in that moment, she smiled, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't need to say. You see, attraction at this stage is subtle. It lives in pauses and eye contact that doesn't demand but invites in a voice that doesn't chase. But grounds, now let's bring this to you, because this is not about one man, this is about you. If you are over 60 and you believe your time has passed, you are looking at it the wrong way. Your power is not in becoming younger. Your power is in becoming deeper. Women who are emotionally aware are drawn to men who are not desperate for validation, who do not rush to prove themselves, who carry calmness in their body language, who listen more than they speak, and who are comfortable being alone. Because when a man is comfortable alone, he becomes rare, and rarity creates attraction. Now let me tell you something most men miss completely when a younger woman looks at an older man. It is not always about romance. Sometimes it is about curiosity. She sees something unfamiliar, a kind of stillness she doesn't see in her own generation, a kind of strength that doesn't shout and that draws her in, not because she wants to possess it, but because she wants to understand it. And sometimes understanding becomes connection, and connection becomes something even deeper. Now, does this mean every young woman who looks at you is attracted to you? No, and it is important to stay grounded, but it does mean something powerful. You are not invisible. You are simply operating on a different level, one that fewer people understand, but those who do feel it instantly. So what should you do when this happens? Nothing extreme, nothing forced. Just remember these truths. Do not chase the moment, let it come to you. Do not overtalk, silence is your strength. Do not try to act younger. Depth is your advantage, and most importantly, do not doubt yourself, because doubt is the only thing that weakens presence. Now imagine this. What if the reason she keeps looking at him is not because he is trying to attract her, but because he is not trying at all? That is the paradox most men never understand. The less you try to be more noticeable, you become, the less you chase attention, the more naturally it comes. Because true attraction is not built on effort, it is built on energy. And energy does not lie. So the next time you catch someone looking at you, do not panic. Do not overthink. Just sit calmly, hold your presence, and let the moment breathe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. And in that stillness, you become unforgettable. You are not too old. You are not past your time. You are simply standing in a phase of life where attraction is no longer loud, it is felt, and those who are ready will always notice. Thank you. The next evening, he returned to the same place, not because he expected anything to happen, but because routine had become his quiet companion over the years. And when a man reaches this stage of life, he no longer chases moments. He allows them to arrive or pass without resistance. He sat again in the same corner, ordered the same tea, and for a while nothing happened. Just the soft hum of conversations around him, the clinking of cups, the distant sound of traffic outside. But then, without effort, without anticipation, he felt it again, that subtle awareness that someone's attention had settled on him. He didn't turn immediately because he had learned something most men never learn, that reacting too quickly breaks the natural rhythm of connection. And when he finally looked up, she was there again, sitting a few tables away, not hiding her gaze this time, not pretending to look elsewhere, just calmly observing him as if she had already decided there was something about him worth understanding. Now, this is where most men would make a mistake. They would adjust their posture too much, fix their clothes, try to appear more interesting than they naturally are. But he did nothing. He simply acknowledged her presence with a brief glance and returned to his tea. And strangely, that small act of non-reaction deepened her curiosity even more, because what she was experiencing was rare. A man who was not trying to pull her attention, but also not avoiding it. A man who existed fully in his own space without needing to dominate hers. And this is where female psychology reveals something powerful. Attraction often grows in the space where there is no pressure, where a woman feels free to observe without being pursued. Because pursuit can sometimes feel like expectation, but calm presence feels like permission. Permission to be curious, permission to approach, permission to explore without fear. And so, after a few minutes, she stood again and walked toward him. But this time, there was a different energy, less hesitation, more intention. She sat down without asking this time and smiled softly, saying, "You come here often, don't you?" And he gave a simple answer. "Yes, I do." No long explanation, no attempt to impress. And that simplicity created comfort because when a man speaks without trying to add weight to his words feel lighter and more honest. She leaned slightly forward, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that showed interest and said, "There's something about you that feels peaceful." And he paused for a moment, not because he didn't have something to say, but because he understood the value of silence. Then he replied, "Maybe it's because I stopped trying to be anything else." And that answer stayed with her, not because it was clever, but because it was real. You see, women especially, those who have lived enough to see through appearances, are drawn to authenticity more than perfection. They don't expect you to be flawless. They expect you to be grounded. And grounded men do not rush conversations. They allow them to unfold naturally. Now, as they sat there talking softly about simple things, life routines, memories, nothing extraordinary, something important was happening beneath the surface. She was not just listening to his words, she was feeling his energy. And energy is something that cannot be faked at this stage. Younger men can perform confidence, but older men either carry it or they don't. And when they do, it feels stable, like a quiet anchor in a world that often feels rushed and uncertain. And that stability creates a kind of attraction that is not loud but deeply felt. And here's the truth most men overlook. When a woman says you feel peaceful, she is not just complimenting you, she is revealing what she is missing in her own environment. Because people are drawn toward what balances them. And in a world full of noise, calm becomes magnetic. In a world full of performance, authenticity becomes rare. And rarity, as you now understand, creates attraction. So if you ever find yourself in a moment like this, remember that you don't need to add anything extra. You don't need to become more entertaining, more charming, more impressive. You simply need to remain steady, because steadiness is what allows connection to grow without pressure. And as the evening slowly came to an end, she stood up again, and before leaving, she looked at him with the same calm gaze and said, "I think I'll see you here again." And he nodded, not as a promise, but as an acceptance of possibility. Because at this stage of life, a man does not hold tightly to outcomes, he allows them to form naturally. And that is exactly what makes him different from the rest. Days passed, and what began as silent glances slowly turned into a quiet routine of shared space. Sometimes they spoke for minutes, sometimes for longer. But what mattered was not the length of the conversation, it was the consistency of presence. And this is where something deeper begins to develop, not through dramatic gestures, but through repeated calm interactions. Because real connection is not built in intensity, it is built in familiarity, and familiarity, when it is comfortable, creates trust. She began to open up more, not all at once, but in small pieces, sharing stories about her work, her thoughts, her past experiences, and he listened without interruption, without rushing to give advice. And this is something extremely important for you to understand. At your age, one of your greatest strengths is not what you say, but how you listen. Because listening without trying to fix or control creates a space where a woman feels safe to express herself. And safety, as you have already learned, is one of the strongest foundations of attraction. Now, one evening, as the light outside faded into a soft orange glow, she asked him a question that carried more weight than her previous words. She said, "Do you ever feel lonely?" And for a brief moment, the air between them became still, not uncomfortable, but honest. And he looked at her with calm eyes and said sometimes, "But I made peace with it." And that answer carried depth because it was not an attempt to hide weakness nor to exaggerate strength. It was simply the truth. And truth has a unique effect on human connection. It removes the need for masks. She nodded slowly, as if understanding something beyond the words, and then said, "I think people my age are more afraid of being alone than people your age." And he gave a slight smile and replied, "Maybe because we've already faced it and realized it doesn't destroy us, it teaches us." And that moment created a shift, not in attraction alone, but in respect. Because respect grows when someone sees that you have faced life without losing yourself. And this is where many men underestimate their value. They think their age is a disadvantage, when in reality it is a source of depth that cannot be replicated. Every experience, every challenge, every moment of solitude has shaped you into someone who carries a quiet understanding of life. And that understanding becomes visible in the way you speak, the way you pause, the way you respond. And women who are perceptive can feel that instantly. Now, let's be clear, this is not about creating a fantasy or assuming every interaction will turn into something romantic. It is about recognizing the shift in how attraction works at this stage. It is no longer based on surface level excitement. It is based on emotional resonance. And resonance happens when two people feel understood without needing to explain everything. As their conversations continued, she began to mirror his calmness, speaking slower, listening more. And this is another sign that connection is forming. When someone begins to adjust their energy to match yours, it means they feel comfortable within your presence, and comfort is the bridge that leads to deeper connection. Now, one evening, she arrived later than usual, and when she saw him already sitting there, she smiled in a way that was more personal than before and said, "I was hoping you would be here." And he simply replied, "I usually am." No dramatic reaction, no attempt to highlight the importance of the moment, just steady consistency. And that consistency is what made him reliable in her eyes. Because in a world where people change quickly, reliability becomes rare. And again, rarity creates value. So understand this clearly. Your strength is not in creating emotional highs. Your strength is in providing emotional stability. And stability, when it is genuine, becomes something people naturally return to again and again. One evening, the rain began unexpectedly, soft at first, then steady enough to keep people inside longer than they planned. The cafe grew quieter as some rushed out, while others settled deeper into their seats. She sat across from him, watching the rain through the window, and then turned back to him with a thoughtful expression and said, "Do you think people can connect without needing to define it?" And he looked at her for a moment, understanding the depth behind the question, and said yes. When there is no pressure to define something, it has more space to grow naturally. And she nodded as if that answer gave her relief. Because often what creates tension in human connection is the need to label it too quickly. Friendship, attraction, companionship. People rush to put a name on it before they fully understand it. But at this stage of life, a man learns that not everything needs immediate definition. Some things are better experienced slowly. And as the rain continued, the conversation became softer, more reflective. They spoke about time, about how quickly it moves, about how different life feels when you stop chasing it and start observing it. And in that moment, she said something that revealed the truth behind her initial curiosity. She said, "When I first saw you, I couldn't understand why I kept looking. But now I think I know it's because you don't seem to need anything from anyone, and that feels rare." And he listened quietly because he knew that what she was expressing was not just about him. It was about what she had experienced elsewhere. Many interactions in her life were likely filled with expectations, demands, or subtle pressures. But here she felt none of that. and that absence created comfort. Now, this is the key lesson for you. Do not become a man who seeks to take from every interaction. Become a man who allows space within it. Because when you allow space, people feel free, and when they feel free, they choose to stay, not because they have to, but because they want to. And that choice is far more powerful than forced attention. As the rain slowly faded, she stood up preparing to leave. But before she did, she looked at him with a calm, steady gaze and said, "I'm glad I kept looking that day." And he gave a small nod, not as a victory, but as an acknowledgement of a shared moment. Because at this stage, he understood something deeply important. Not every connection needs to become something more to be meaningful. Sometimes the value lies in the experience itself, in the understanding, in the quiet exchange of presence. And as she walked away, there was no sense of loss, no urgency to hold on to the moment, only a quiet appreciation of what had unfolded naturally. And that is where true confidence exists, not in controlling outcomes, but in being at peace with. And that is where true confidence exists, not in controlling outcomes, but in being at peace with whatever comes next. Because when a man reaches this level of calm, he no longer measures his worth by who stays or who leaves. He understands that his presence itself is enough. And as he sat there watching the last drops of rain fade into the night, he realized something simple yet powerful, that it was never about her age or his age. It was about the energy between them, the quiet understanding that needed no explanation, the rare feeling of being seen without trying to be seen. And that is something many people search for their entire lives, but only a few ever truly experience. So if you are listening to this and you have ever doubted your value because of your age, let that doubt end here, because you are not behind, you are not forgotten, you are not invisible. You are simply standing in a space where depth matters more than appearance, where calmness speaks louder than words, where presence becomes your greatest strength, and the right people will always feel it without you needing to prove anything. So the next time someone looks at you, do not look away. Do not question it. Do not shrink yourself. Just hold your ground. Breathe slowly and allow the moment to exist, because sometimes a single glance can carry more truth than 1,000 words. And sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones that begin in silence and grow without force. This is your time, not to chase, but to understand, not to impress, but to be real, not to become someone else, but to finally become yourself. And when you do that, something extraordinary happens. You stop seeking attention and instead, you attract it naturally, quietly, effortlessly, and that is the kind of presence that never fades with age. It only becomes stronger, deeper, and more unforgettable. Thank you for being here. And if this message spoke to you, remember to carry this calm into your life, because the world does not need more noise. It needs more men like you who understand the power of quiet strength. Thank you for listening.